Hi, we're back again, and we're doing a little topic now all about the atmosphere around the Earth and how that has changed over the years from when the Earth was very young to what we've got today. And then we're going to be looking on towards the changes that humans are making to that atmosphere as we sort of develop as a species and develop across the planet, and the changes that we're causing and how that is affecting things, and possibly even some ideas of what we could do about it. So anyway, so in this first topic we're going to look at how the atmosphere has changed from the very early Earth to today and why that's changed. And as with all of these things, what I'm trying to do, I'm just trying to get the fundamental scientific ideas across to you. I will use some maybe simplified models, but then you will have your written work through the PowerPoints as well, and you can go into these things in a lot more detail. So starting off with looking at today, what was the early atmosphere of the Earth like? What kind of life could live in that early atmosphere of the Earth, and then what made it change? How did it change to what we've got today? And then we're going to have a quick look, we'll do this another time as well, but a quick look at how our human activities is affecting that. So here we go. Back 2,700 million years ago, the Earth was very young. It had cooled down from its molten ball of rock, and it was just about in a position where life was just starting to get going. But the atmosphere of the Earth then was almost all carbon dioxide. There was virtually no oxygen there. So you or I could not survive there because we haven't got any oxygen. Well, in fact, there's oxygen there, but it's all tied up with this carbon. The atoms in the Earth basically don't change, and they haven't changed. Get a few sort of meteorites crashing into the Earth, bringing a few extra bits and pieces in. We send a few spacecraft up and take a few bits and pieces out. But basically, we've got the same set of atoms that we had to start off with. So the oxygen that we're using today has always been here, but it's been tied up with the carbon, and it's just stuck there like that. So this is what it was like. The Earth had cooled down a little bit, but the atmosphere was full of carbon dioxide, and as you may know, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, so the Earth was very warm at that time, much more sort of global warming than we've got now. And then things started to change, and what we needed to do was to get the carbon out of the atmosphere, and to do that we had plants and algae that used photosynthesis. They appeared on the planet. Now instead of those, I'm just going to draw a tree, because they all work the same way. And as you know from photosynthesis, what you need for that to happen is you need some carbon dioxide, CO2 here. You add a little bit of water to it, and the plants then turn the carbon dioxide and the water into some glucose, or some sugar if you like. So we have a carbon and oxygen, hydrogen and oxygen goes in, and it makes a carbohydrate, which is the basic stuff that plants are made from. And then we eat the plants, animals eat the plants, and so that glucose, that carbohydrate in that plant goes into animals' bodies as well. And that's how life works. Life works on this planet based around carbon, hydrogen and oxygen. And we had those, but the carbon and the oxygen was tied up here. We had hydrogen because we had water in the oceans as well, so there's hydrogen in there. So what happens is you get a tree, takes in carbon dioxide, and then that tree chucks out oxygen as a waste product, because as well as carbon dioxide and water making glucose, it also throws out oxygen as a waste product. And this is the key thing. So by photosynthesizing organisms, maybe some algae, mostly plants, it slowly takes that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and throws oxygen back, and that carbon that was in there is then stored inside these living organisms, whether they're trees, plants, algae, whatever they are. And so very, very slowly you start to take carbon out of the atmosphere and replace it with oxygen. And then after a while we have got a different balance of gases, and you've got oxygen around, and then animals can come along. But the thing with these plants here is when they die and they decompose, the carbon that was in them, that comes back out into the atmosphere, and you have this carbon cycle going on. So it doesn't permanently take the carbon out of the atmosphere unless some things happen. So this tree, let's say this tree dies, and the ground is a bit soggy and marshy, and remember, it wasn't trees, it was all sorts of other plants, and that dies, and that goes under the ground there. There we go. So there's a dead tree, and it has taken the carbon with it underground. And the carbon in the dead plants that have sunk underground is stored there, and over time that turns into coal, into a fossil fuel. So what we've cleverly done is we've taken carbon out of the atmosphere and we have left lots of oxygen in the atmosphere. We still have carbon dioxide in the atmosphere because we need that for the plants, because the plants need the carbon dioxide to grow, and we need the plants to grow so we can eat them. So that's how it goes. So we're looking at ways that the carbon was taken out of the atmosphere. Now you've got this photosynthesis thing here, but if you've then got an animal that comes along and eats this plant, the carbon that was in that plant then goes into that animal and it's stored within that animal's body. And then when that animal dies, let's say here we've got some seashells and some bones and things like that of things that lived in the sea, that will decompose, but then the bones and the shells will sink to the bottom of the ocean, and then they get covered with sort of muck and debris over the years, and they get squashed and squashed and squashed, and they turn into sedimentary rocks, which is largely, they've got calcium in it, because you know you need calcium for bones, and it's also got carbon dioxide or carbon and oxygen, which came from the food that it ate. And so you end up with calcium carbonate or chalk or limestone. And this is what this stuff here is. And down on the south coast, all the rocks underground are made of that. And sometimes we know that it was shells and things that fell in there, because sometimes they stay in the rock, and then we have a fossil from a bit of limestone. So we have carbon taken out of the atmosphere in the bodies or the remains of sea creatures, but also other remains of sea creatures, and it tends to be sea creatures. That's where life got going, and when they died they sank to the bottom, got covered in various debris and sediments, and so their carbon stayed underground, and the plants turned into coal, and then the soft bodies of sea creatures, we've got a dead octopus here, and then we've got a sick squid. That was for Eva, by the way. She asked for some more terrible dad jokes in the video, so I hope you appreciate that one. So you have these bodies of animals that have died and gone to the bottom of the ocean, and they've got carbon stored inside them, and that decomposes and that turns into oil and gas. So we've got coal from the plants, oil and gas from the sort of soft tissue remains of sea creatures, and those are the fossil fuels that are holding all this old prehistoric carbon with them under the ground. So that's basically what's going on. We had an early atmosphere full of carbon dioxide. Photosynthesis took the carbon dioxide out, replaced it with oxygen. That carbon was then in the bodies of plants, and those bodies of plants went under the ground and took the carbon with them. The plants that were eaten, that carbon then went into the bodies of animals, and then when those animals died, their soft tissue, some of that sunk under the ground at the bottom of the oceans, got covered in things, and then if their soft tissue didn't happen to that, but you had just the bones and the shells were left, they will get crushed and turned into sedimentary rocks. So all this carbon has been locked away for millions of years, and what we're doing now is we're starting to dig up these trees and these sick squids and things like that and burn them, because those are the fossil fuels. So all the work that went on over billions of years, taking all that carbon out, by us burning stuff, we're throwing it back up, and that's where the global warming comes from. So that was the early atmosphere of the Earth. Nowadays, the atmosphere of the Earth looks a little bit like this. And the vast majority of it, it's about 78% is nitrogen. Nitrogen doesn't really do much. It's not very easy to get it to react with something, but if you can get it to react, then it does cause more pollutions as well, because nitrogen in car engines with the high temperatures of combustion, if there's nitrogen in there, it makes nitrous oxides, which then causes nitric acids in the air, and you get acid rains and things like that. So nitrogen's there. 21% is oxygen, O2, and then this tiny fraction, less than 1%, actually less than 0.1%, is carbon dioxide. So there's very little carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and by adding to it, it really does upset the balance just by putting little bits of extra carbon dioxide in. So we're talking about this low carbon economy that we're supposed to have. But there really isn't very much carbon dioxide in there at the moment, and more that you put up really upsets that balance.